Hello students, welcome to EPJ Pathshala. I am Shashwati Shah, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Sikkim University. Today we'll be talking about reading new literature in English, and the name of the module is Tracing Movements and Claiming Spaces, Articulation of Diaspora. The content of this module is written by Mr. Subrata Kumar Dash, who is a research scholar at the University of Hyderabad. In this module, we are going to learn about tracing dispersion, movement, and claiming spaces. We'll also try to articulate the theory of diaspora, the concept of diaspora, starting from its etymological origin. We will take up pre-colonial migration, colonial migration, and post-colonial migration. We'll discuss the concepts of imagined community and the question of the concept of space in diasporic literature. We'll also discuss how diaspora has been articulated by the Western scholars, by cinema, newspaper, magazine, and also politicians all across the world. Let us begin. Now we'll begin with the module, and we begin with a quote from Amitabh Ghosh's The Diaspora in Indian Culture. He writes, and I quote, "The modern Indian diaspora, the huge migration from the subcontinent that began in the mid-19th century, is not merely one of the most important demographic dislocations of modern times, it now represents an important force in world culture." Now coming to the word diaspora, what does the word diaspora mean? Over here, we'll try to get to the etymology of the word diaspora and understand the significance of the concept. The term diaspora is derived from the Greek word dia, meaning between, through, across, and spiro, meaning to sow the seeds. This suggests, on the one hand, the idea of dispersion, on the other hand, that of stasis and stability, sowing seed, suggesting new life and new roots. The situation of any group of people dispersed, whether forcibly or voluntarily, throughout the world, referring particularly to the Jewish experience. This is from the Collins Dictionary of Sociology. It was first used by the Greeks to refer to the movement of the Jews away from their homeland, the exile of the Jew from the Holy Land, and their dispersal around the world during the 8th century BC. Today, the term is applied to all ethnic and racial groups living in alien lands. Example, African and Armenian diaspora, Indian indentured labor diasporas, Chinese and Lebanese diasporas, Black Caribbean diasporas. Tracing phases of diaspora and movements, there are three phases of Indian immigration. Number one, pre-colonial migration to the Southeast Asian countries. Number two, colonial migration, which consists largely of the Indian indentured laborers that began in the 1830s to the British, French, and Dutch colonies. And number three, post-colonial migration to the industrially developed first world countries and the Persian Gulf countries. Now coming to the first category, pre-colonial migration. It happened mostly as a result of migration to the Southeast Asian countries like Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Burma, Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries. Since the 1st century AD, Indian princes, priests, poets, and artisans migrated to these countries. The purpose was mostly that of trade and the propagation of religion. Merchants from Gujarat, Bengal, Tamil Nadu settled down in great port cities like Malacca, Ternate, Tidor during this period. Colonial migration, mostly, as we have already talked about, indentured labor. This happened during the colonial period largely because what was happening here is that the British rulers were forcing a lot of people, mainly from the economically backward section of the society, to migrate to other parts of the world which were becoming plantations of the British rule, and they were forced to go there, mostly because of the poverty that they were experiencing over here, and they were shown a dream. I mean, they were made to dream that they will find a better life over there, more economic development, and they will not experience poverty anymore over there. So it was a dream of a better future that made them migrate to this places, but the reality was very different, and we'll talk about it. This colonial migration started in 1934 after the abolition of slavery system in imperial plantations. To supply the labor shortages in sugar, tea, coffee, cocoa and rubber plantation in these colonies, people from the colonial countries were migrated to these places. Indian indentured labour is transported to the British, French and Dutch colonies. Indentured labour is described as been described by Jane, a contract by which the immigrant was bound to work for a given employer for a 3 to 5 years term, performing the task assigned to him for a specific wage. Initial contract was for 5 years. Reasons are many. There were social oppression, shrinking of cottage industry, periodic famine, resulting in extreme poverty and unemployment. This was the condition that was prevailing in the places of their origin, which kind of forced them to listen to what the British rulers were promising them in the lands of plantations. There was abuse of this system. Hugh Tinker even termed this system as a new system of slavery. This system was officially abolished by British government in 1917. Indians were transported to the Indian Ocean countries like South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Uganda, Mauritius and other countries. Pacific Ocean countries like Fiji, Caribbean countries like Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica and other countries, South American countries like Suriname, Guyana and some other countries. Coming to post-colonial migration. Now, post-colonial migration are of three types. Migration to Persian Gulf countries, migration to the industrially developed first world countries, and number three, twice migration from East African countries to the industrially developed first world countries. Migration to Persian Gulf countries. 1973 experienced the beginning on the rapidly increasing demand for expatriate labor in oil exporting countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Yemen, Turkey, Kuwait, Qatar, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan and some other countries. These Indians were basically semi-skilled laborers for infrastructure and domestic workers on contract basis. These are not skilled but semi-skilled laborers. They were mostly meant for domestic work, for construction sites. They were not the educated group of people who go to the first world in search of employment. During the 1970s and 1980s, the Indian people, basically from Kerala, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Punjab, Rajasthan, Eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and other states scattered voluntarily to these countries. Now, migration to the industrially developed first world countries. This group of population basically comprises of academicians, skilled laborers and entrepreneurs who are going to multicultural metropolitan European and American countries like Britain, France, Germany, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand and some other first world countries. Now, Indians going to America began after the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1965, a legislation that repealed national origins quotas in the US, migration law. The Immigration Act of 1976 of Canada allowed the entry of immigrants to fulfill commercial, social, cultural, and demographic requirements of Canada. To continue its non-discriminatory immigration policy, the law was changed again in 2002 and was called the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Intellectual academics like Bharati Mukherjee, Jhumpa Lahiri living in the United States, Neeraj Chaudhary, Amitabh Ghosh, Sunetra Gupta in England, Rohinton Mistry, Ashish Gupta in Canada, and some others in the first world countries. So you can see, as you can see, the migration that is happening to the industrially developed first world countries comprise mainly of the skilled laborers, mostly engineers and men from the IT world, and also academicians and intellectuals who are in the prominent positions in the universities of the first world nations. These population differ from the kind of population that were migrating in the colonial times. Now, articulation of diaspora that will include articulation of pre-colonial and colonial migrants, articulation of Indian diasporic academics in the first world countries, articulation by diasporic filmmaker on accented cinemas, articulation by Indian diasporic politicians in host countries, and articulation at present time by activists. Firstly, articulation of pre-colonial and colonial migration. During pre-colonial period, Indians emigrated to Southeast Asian countries, and we have already talked about it. They went mostly for propagation of religion and for the business purposes. They were mostly trade relationships that were happening between India and the Southeast Asian countries. When Indian indentured laborers landed in plantations, they faced many problems. Now, this is the colonial migration period. So, where the indentured labor were migrating from India to the land of plantations. So, here, when they landed, when they left their country of origin, they, as we already spoke about it, they had a dream of a better life. But when they landed in the country of the plantation, the scene was different, very different from what they thought of. Here, they had to face a lot of problems: hardships, labor, food problem, physical and mental abuses, and other traumatic situations. They're already in a different climatic geographic zone. Moreover, they had to face harsh treatments from the agents who were the managers in these plantations. They were treated almost same as earlier slave of Africa. So there's not much difference between what the slaves were treated like and how these laborers in the plantations were treated like. They were also slaves in a different way. They reported abuse of indenture system, and thus on 29th May 1839, overseas manual labor was temporarily prohibited. The abuse on them was continued directly or indirectly. In South Africa, with Mahatma Gandhi, they showed severe resistance for such abuse. This forced the British government to legally ban the indentured labor system in 1917. Now, coming to the concept of imagined communities. Anderson compared the communities, ghettos, of Indian diasporic people with imagined communities. This is because they almost did not know each other. Still, they found a communion among themselves when they realized they all belong to the same homeland, India. So, kind of brotherhood developed, kind of finding friends and families abroad. The only commonality between them was that they came from the same place of origin. They did not know each other when they were in India, but when they went abroad, they had to fall back upon each other for the kind of emotional support that they required in a country where they hardly knew anybody. These Indian laborers thus had a shared feeling and comradeship among themselves. They again started practicing their ethnic cultural program in their ethnic ghettos, religiosity, practicing caste hierarchies and other home cultural practices. So they could not give up the practices that were ingrained in them. So they started practicing the same even in those places that they migrated to, and they kind of tried to build a community of their own within a country which did not belong to them. So this is an attempt on their part to make a home in the world unknown. They performed all this to create their home-like atmosphere in alien countries. Articulation of diasporic academics in first world countries. These academics live in in-between space. The term has been taken from Bhabha, and diaspora space, a term which has been taken from Avtar Bra. Bhabha writes, and I am quoting, "Terrains from elaborating strategies of selfhood, singular or communal, that initiate new signs of identity and innovative sites of collaboration and contestations, in act of defining the idea of society itself. It is in the emergence of the interstices, the overlap and displacement of domains of difference, that the intersubjectivity and collective experiences of nationness, community interest or cultural values are negotiated." Avtar Bra argued that diaspora space is the intersection of diaspora, border and dislocation, which is a point of confluence of economic, political, cultural and psychic processes. This diaspora space is occupied not only by the migrants and their descendants, but also by those who are constructed and represented as indigenous. The concept of diaspora specifies a matrix of economic, political and cultural interrelationships which construct the communality between the various components of dispersed group. The concept of diaspora delineates a field of identification where imagined communities are forged within and out of a confluence of narratives from annals of collective memory and rememory. This diaspora space is a space of emancipation and enunciation. Anything can be emerged from this space. Here, diasporic people totally feel free to articulate their voice against their home culture's tabooed things. So there is a sense of liberty also. So here you can criticize things that are taboos in your home culture. It's a place of emancipation. It's a place where you can grow, you can develop, you attain a certain sort of liberty, and you attain a space from where you have a distant view of the place from where you originated. And therefore, this gives you a position to criticize those practices back at home that you don't subscribe to. Sometimes, they also raise voice against the discrimination meted out over them by host people. So this is not just criticism of the practices that are there in the homeland, they're also criticizing the kind of reception they received in the host land, how they're treated over there, the kind of difficulties that they have to come up, they have to deal with, they came across, they have to deal with, the problems that they are facing in the everyday experiences. All of this come out in their works, writings, whatever, their voices. In creative literature, we find many novels raise their voices against their home cultural practices. Some writers like V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, A.K. Ramanujan, Rohinton Mistry, Jhumpa Lahiri, Bharati Mukherjee, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, Sunetra Gupta, Monica Ali and some other, they all try to voice this kind of criticism about the places of origin. They sometimes rewrite Indian ethnic mythological tales to give voice to female characters. One classic example can be Divakaruni's Palace of Illusions and Bharati Mukherjee's Jasmine and some other works by such writers. They rewrite to appease the Western people, like African American writers of Harlem Renaissance and Mexican writers settled in the USA. They also try to make their own identity with such articulation in foreign countries. Now, coming to articulation by popular cinema, diasporic cinema. Some diasporic filmmakers try to attack their home culture. They stay in first world countries, metropolitan cities, taking their location as a free space and articulate their radical voices. Their films are called auteur, French for author. Films are directors' films that reflect the director's personal creative visions. Sometimes they depict the themes which are marginal, tabooed, and untouched by traditional filmmakers. Most of their films have been banned by religious fundamentalists. So the free space that they get as a result of their diasporic existence, from there they try to voice out against certain practices that are unacceptable in their own home culture. But this sort of films are very well received in the West. But when it comes to the places of their origin, they mostly get banned by the religious fundamentalists and other activists working within the country. These films can be termed as accented films, as has been used by Hamid Nafi. She argues that these films emerge not from the accented speech of the diegetic characters within these films, but from the displacement of the filmmakers. These accented films negotiate the interstitial dialogues between the home and host societies of the filmmakers. These films give two sides for marginalized women: a side of resistance from the part of the film's characters, and other being the side for the expression of that resistance for the filmmakers. This is also the expression of post-colonial feminism through these accented cinemas. Through these films, the diasporic filmmakers tried to eradicate the subaltern status of women and allow them a space to be heard among mainstream social phenomena. These feminist accented cinemas not only project strong-willed and sexually assertive women, but also portray women as agents of progressive, revolutionary, egalitarian, social thinkers who openly show their free spirits. Deepa Mehta's film like Fire and Water, Gurinder Chadda's Bend It Like Beckham, and Bhaji on the Beach, Meera Nair's Mississippi Masala, Monsoon Wedding, and The Namesake are examples of this kind of films. Some newspaper and magazines run by Indian academics abroad play a great role to articulate their voice while they face adverse situation abroad. Such newspapers include Indians Abroad, the Shangbad Bichitro, Confluence, South Asian Perspectives since 2002, and others. Many popular Indian brand songs also play such roles. Now finally coming to this segment, which is called Articulation by Politicians and Activists. Some of the Indian professionals and diplomats take part in parliamentary election of their host countries and sometimes get elected as members of parliaments. They sometimes articulate for their Indian fellows, thus to create the reliable ambience for his or her fellow immigrants in foreign countries. There are many such elected politicians in foreign countries' parliaments like Bobby Jindal, Priti Patel, Harjit Singh Sajjan and others. All these politicians are are actually victims of hate crime. They had been subjected to racial discrimination and other forms of violence from time to time. And they kind of come up to protect the interest of their fellow migrants in the host countries. The Indian activists of organizations in the foreign countries protest against the backlash meted out to Indian people in the host society. Therefore, in this module, we got a fairly good idea about the concept of diaspora, about pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial diaspora, and also the articulation of diaspora by various sections like that of the Western academia, by popular films, and also newspapers, magazines, and politicians and activists. I hope you enjoyed the model. Thank you very much.